Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Marketing Mondays with Maria. I am Maria, the host and also the founding marketer at Magier. And today I'm joined by Dan Holt, who is a digital strategist and managing director of Boss Digital. I am a huge fan of his viral comic series on LinkedIn that you may have seen before called Mary's Marketing Adventures. It's easily one of the funniest and most relatable content series about and also for marketers on LinkedIn, in my opinion. So yeah, I cannot wait to pick Dan's brain a little today and get his thoughts on marketing and also the topics that he tackles in the series. So Dan, let's start with your story, if that's all right. How did you get into marketing and what was that journey like?
So my first job out of university was working in operations for an IT training company. And I was really shit, like so bad. Like I remember when I joined, I was the only graduate in that particular department. And I just thought, I'm going to breeze this, right? I'm just so much better than all these people. And by about like 10 a.m. that morning, I was like a quivering wreck under my desk, just like, oh my God, this is a nightmare. Anyway, so for about 6 months, I made a total tit out of myself, and eventually handed in my notice. And the MD said, "Look, you seem like a reasonably switched on person, but clearly this is not your bag. Is there something else you'd like to do?" And I said, "Well, marketing seems vaguely interesting." So he shoved me into the marketing function. I did that for a little while, and then some stuff happened that I won't bore you with. And I ended up thinking, do you know what? I'm going to start my own company. And because I don't know anything about anything, it may as well be a marketing agency, because you don't, as far as I could tell, and it's turned out to be pretty accurate, you don't really need to know anything about anything to start a marketing agency, which is a problem that maybe we'll come back to. So anyway, I started it in sort of very late 2009, early 2010. I had no idea what an idiot I was making out of myself, because, you don't know what you don't know. So like ignorance is bliss. And that was really the kind of story then for like the next 10 years. It's like, I would, every kind of 18 months, I'd have this kind of like reality check where I'd be like, oh my God, I didn't know anything before. I was such an idiot. I would feel like I'd finally made it. And then I would have like an 18 months later, I'd be like, oh no, I was still making an idiot out of myself. I think that lack of kind of formal training that exists within marketing, the lack of structure, is a bit like the Wild West. I think that's one of the things that I guess I've kind of lent into with that Mary series.
Sounds like a very bold decision to start an agency. Did you study anything related to marketing before, or?
I knew literally nothing.
Oh
I had about 10 grand, right, in my account. And I was like, right, I'm just going to hire one or two people for a few months who seem to know what they're talking about and see if I can find some clients. I wouldn't recommend doing it that way. I remember at one point, the guy who was one of those guys, we were stood in the co-op buying lunch, and it was about 3 months in. And at that point, there were like 3 or 4 of us, and we didn't have a single client, right? And I was basically paying absolute peanuts as well. I mean, it was like the whole thing was a shambles and farcical and embarrassing. And this guy said to me, he was like, do you know what, Dan, I reckon you might run the biggest agency in the UK not to have a single client. And I was like, I started laughing, and then I basically just started crying, because I was like, that is just like, the truth hurts, right? So I would not recommend doing it that way. And it is a miracle. Thankfully, between about month 3 and month 6, we then got a whole ton of clients. God knows how, but we did. I think just kind of sheer determination and refusal to face reality, relentless optimism that you need in those kind of early stages to convince yourself that you're not in the shit, which, we were, but somehow got through it.
That is how Boss Digital, I assume, was born, or did you change the name in the process?
Yeah, we've changed our name like 11 times.
Okay.
And one of the things I take aim at quite a bit with the Mary stuff is unnecessary rebranding. And as with most of the themes with the Mary stuff, I am my primary source of inspiration, like my own mistakes, right? So we have done more than our fair share of rebranding.
And moving on to LinkedIn and the content that you're producing, do you remember your first viral LinkedIn post or first post that performed just really well for you? What were the beginnings of your LinkedIn journey? I feel like every founder at one point or marketer at one point is like, okay, I need to be on LinkedIn. How did you start, and what was your first post that resonated?
As a strategist, I guess I've kind of prided myself on being quite hands-on in most of the channels in which I talk. So if I'm talking about SEO or PPC or email or B2B kind of podcasting or whatever it is, Like in most cases, I will have like thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of hands-on experience that I can draw upon and lots of case studies. And I was really conscious that that wasn't the case with social media. I'm basically quite introverted. I'm a very socially awkward person. I've got no interest in social media on a personal level. That's not a great trait for someone running a digital agency. So I was like, right, this is an Achilles heel. I need to do something about it. So I tried on about 4 or 5 occasions to like start like a content strategy on LinkedIn. I knew that I couldn't just like be myself because like that's just not, that was never going to work for me. So I needed like quite like a formulaic approach. Tried about 4 or 5 times, didn't get anywhere at all. The first post I had that did get that, I don't know if you'd call it going viral, but you know, it got a few hundred likes, was just basic kind of copy, talking actually about copywriting. And I remember at the time thinking like, I've cracked it. This is it, right? Like I've got the formula, you know, this is aiming to the moon. And the following day I put out a really similar post, and it got like 2 likes. And I was like, oh, actually shit. And I think that was like quite an important lesson, is just a lot of it's luck, right? A lot of it's luck, both kind of in an algorithmic sense and also in terms of, you know, do the right people comment at the right time. And you can kind of over applaud yourself when it goes well. You can be excessively harsh on yourself when it goes badly. I remember I went on a walk to try and like reflect and be like, look, I need to come up with something that actually allows me to kind of consistently get some traction. And it was that walk that then led me to having the idea to like take the whole cartoon approach, and that's what led to Mary.
What were the questions you were asking yourself when you were coming up with it?
So I guess there were 2 things. First of all, I was like, I know I want it to be in like a story format, and I was like, what's more obviously story than a cartoon, right? As soon as you see a drawing, I think your mind adjusts and you immediately interpret the information in a story context, right? So there was that. But I think also, I used to run a podcast, and one of the interviews I did was with a guy called Joe Paluzzi. I don't know if you know Joe, but he's considered like the godfather of content marketing, and wrote a book many, many years ago called, I think it was Content Inc., that was like the content marketing book for a while. Anyway, when I interviewed him, he said something that really struck a chord with me. He said, look, Dan, when you look at all the most successful content marketing strategies, B2B, B2C, they adhere to a certain number of principles. The first is that they have a really clear content angle. It's what he calls the tilt, but they have a really clear, distinct angle. There is something that they're doing that is like just a little bit different from the competition. Secondly, they're really clear on their lead channel, right? They don't subscribe to this like create once, distribute everywhere bullshit, where it's just like you create like a bunch of crap and throw it out across every single channel and hope it gets traction. They build it around the idiosyncrasies of one particular platform. Thirdly, they execute really, really frequently and consistently. And then finally, they do it for a really, really long period of time. So he said, like, actually, the average B2B content strategy takes about 18 months to consistently monetize, right? That's the average. They're just the successful ones, right? 97% are not successful, but of the 3% that are successful, they take about 18 months to consistently monetize. He said, how many brands have the patience to wait for 18 months? Not many, right? So most give up before they've actually started to see the benefit. So he taught me through these different principles, and they really resonated with me. And I was like, Joe, they just make so much sense that when I come to finally doing something that I think might have half a chance, I'm going to work on that basis, right? I am going to be relentlessly consistent, and I'm going to do it around one channel, and I'm going to do it with the expectation that it will take at least 18 months for me to get anything back at all. But I suspect if it's going to work by month 18, you will have seen some signs earlier at a kind of more vanity level. So if I take the Mary stuff, for example, right? It was actually scarily accurate. So like in our first year, I think we got probably about $6,000 worth of business off that I could like directly tie back to the Mary stuff, right? So compared to our other channels, it was like nothing. Between like month 18 and about month 22, we suddenly had like about half a dozen quite large clients that I could trace back to the Mary stuff. So it was a scarily accurate prediction that he had made, and that's probably just a coincidence. But anyway, point is that while it took 18 months for it to monetize, there were obviously indicators at an earlier stage that it was getting traction, right? So every quarter, the kind of median average number of likes would increase. So it started out at about 50, which was like 49 more than I ever got before. And then the quarter after that, it was like 70, and it was 100, and it was 150, and et cetera, et cetera. So there was that sense, albeit at a kind of vanity metric level, at a kind of pure brand level, there was some indicator that this thing was moving in the right direction. Whereas I've been involved in lots of content strategies historically where, like, you know, quarter after quarter, it's just fucking getting no traction at all. And honestly, if that's the case, then you're probably kidding yourself if you think that magically come month 18, it's suddenly the pounds are gonna start rolling in.
Yeah. I think looking at the indicator is super important, like you said. You have to get some feedback from the audience, right? I feel like you will get it if the content is resonating, even if it's only few people that are seeing it, if it's getting few impressions.
It also depends how niche you're going, right? So like with the Mary stuff is super fucking broad, right? Like I would probably not recommend that companies run a content strategy as broad as Mary is, right? And because it's super broad, it means therefore you need kind of bigger numbers to end up talking to some people that actually might buy from you. Whereas if you've got a much more niche content strategy, let's say you're running a podcast for, like, I don't know, CIOs of construction companies, right, in the UK. Like, if it's like really kind of narrow, then you might only need 1% of that engagement in order for it to filter through to the same kind of financial results. Whatever that number is to begin with, it should be going up, right? Like, if whatever you're tracking, it almost doesn't matter what metric you pick, just pick a metric, focus on that metric, and each quarter you should be seeing some progress on it. If you're not, then it probably isn't the content strategy that you were hoping it was going to be.
Yeah. Time to get back to ideation, I would say then. Yeah. Go on a long walk like you did, and hopefully have a breakthrough and find a nice series to do. But before we dive into Mary's Marketing Adventures in more detail, what is Mary's Marketing Adventures for those who haven't seen it before?
So basically, it's a cartoon of this person called Mary, who is, I don't even know what her job title is. Presumably she's in the marketing function. 9 times out of 10, it's in a marketing meeting of one description or another. And basically she's a smart voice in a room full of fucking idiots, right? And it's that relative smartness. It's not necessarily that Mary's a genius, but it's that relative smartness, right? She's the solitary professional in an industry of cowboys and cockends, right? So it's that relative to the morons surrounding her, that she's hopefully a source of some common sense.
The voice of reason, maybe you could call Mary, I would say.
Yeah.
Like, for example, you had an episode about social media and a competitor going viral on TikTok, and then everyone wants to hop on the train. Alarm, alarm. We need to be on TikTok. We need to do the dances. We need to go viral. And then Mary would be the one who is like, we're already doing too much, and let's actually do what's best for our audience.
She basically she slows people down, right? She's like, because there's a lot of children in marketing, and she's like the adult in the room. She's just like, guys, I know this is all very exciting, but let's just slow down. Just think about it.
Yeah. I think one recurring theme from all of the episodes is focus in marketing. So what problems do you see this causing teams long term?
I think it depends on the size of the organization. I think if you're a huge brand, then you can probably get away with a lack of focus. Like, frankly, strategy, I'm not sure. I don't work with many huge brands. Most of our work is with kind of SMEs or small, large brands. So I guess I'm kind of making a bit of a leap here, but it's my belief that strategy is probably less important because there are just such big advantages to being a big brand that you can sort of get away with being a bit average anyway. And secondly, you've got so many resources at your disposal that you probably can run like a genuine omni-channel strategy where you're just fucking doing everything everywhere. And that's fine, right? You've got 1,000 bodies to throw at it. For 99.9% of organizations, that isn't an option, right? We have to instead get really, really focused, right? Strategy is just what we say no to, okay? And therefore, that ability, or 9 times out of 10, inability for marketers to put barriers up around their core strategic activity, and instead to get pulled this way and that way, and whatever fire needs putting out, and whatever, you know, top priority feels really important to the CEO or the sales director or whatever. As a consequence, we just end up doing lots of things really, really badly.
Yeah, I feel like especially in small startups, marketers get pulled in 20 different directions. So you could be doing so many things, but you don't have the resources to do half of them or over half of them. You only have the resources to do one or two, hopefully well, and invest the time into them. Maybe you have some advice for a marketer that is like dealing with 20 things being thrown at them. How do they decide which to focus on?
There's a few things. First of all, is getting really clear on what that routine monthly activity is required to deliver that strategy, right? So if we say that the strategy, and as I say, strategy is, what we say no to, but what's that singular thing left, that this is the thing that we are doing, what is required each month to deliver on that thing, right? How many hours are required from what people to deliver on it consistently, and then wrapping it in like layers of fucking like broken glass and barbed wire so no plastic can interfere with it, right? That is the first step. I think if you've got a great project manager, that's tremendously helpful, particularly where there's lots of different people involved in that, because marketers don't tend to be terribly well organized. So if you've got someone who's quite left brain, quite detail orientated, who can just consistently pull all these people together and keep them on track, that's massively helpful. I think if you don't have that person, then I think a bit of a cheat code is to only assign a very small number of areas of responsibility to each person. So rather than saying, right, for social media, we've got 7 people involved, and the same 7 people are also a bit involved in 10 other channels, instead saying this one person owns social media, right? And that's probably going to come at a bit of a cost. And of course, they might need to pull in some support on occasion from other people. But giving like a single point of ownership just means that like there's much less ambiguity, there's much less room for confusion, and it's much easier to ultimately hold that person accountable. So I think if you don't have a great project manager, then that is a kind of alternative way of getting.
That's also what I've experienced. If a channel or a project is divided onto like 10 people, then no one feels accountable for moving it forward, or at least like there is some shared accountability, but it's much less impactful than one person doing the job.
And shared accountability just means no accountability, right? Like
Yeah, I agree in my experience as well. But to talk about other themes from the episodes next, you also mention being too focused on short-term tactics, short-term strategies, whatever. What risks do you see associated with that for marketers as well? I mean, I think that's kind of also tied to marketers being asked to get instant results from, even in B2B marketing, being like, where are the leads? When you started just like last month.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely, it's totally understandable that anyone who is not well educated in marketing, which frankly includes most marketers, would feel more comfortable with short-term tactics because it's just inherently more tangible. It's easier to, when we're focused on short-term quantifiable results over the next quarter, it just feels more real, right? And there can therefore be also a sense that if someone tries to argue the opposite, that they're just trying to kind of kick the accountability can down the road, right? We just have this kind of skepticism that, the reason why they want to focus on brand is because it gives them a place to hide for the next 2 years. So I think it's understandable that people outside of marketing naturally lean towards those kind of short-term tangible results. And I'm definitely not going to say that there isn't an important role for that. Most organizations should probably be allocating a meaningful percentage of their time and budget towards that, call it direct response, performance, whatever activity. However, for most organizations, it should probably be a minority. It should probably be, 20, 30, 40%, not 60, 80, 90%. And there are several reasons for that. The first thing is that it's hard because every competitor is focused on those short-term measures. It's hard to carve out like a competitive advantage. It's not impossible, but it is hard. Whereas with the brand stuff, we can actually build compound value over time and carve out a competitive advantage over time. But also as well, that long-term stuff, it does have a short-term impact. It's hard to track, but it does have a short-term impact. Whereas the short-term stuff doesn't tend to have a long-term impact. So if we actually want to separate ourselves from the competition and build an advantage, we just have to keep our focus on those longer-term activities. And I think this is particularly true when budgets are tight, when the recession, when the economy feels more difficult and our buyers are taking longer to make decisions. In the kind of typical market, only about 3 to 5% of the buyers are in market at any given time. Whatever that percentage is it's safe to assume that it gets smaller when the economy is struggling. And yet, perversely, what happens in those periods of recession is that we put more emphasis on direct response and performance because we're panicking and we're like, oh my God, there isn't going to be a long term without a successful short term. So we just need to do whatever we can to get leads. The problem is now us and all of our competitors are scrabbling over an infinitesimal number of customers. A, the cost per acquisition is going to go up for all of us. And B, the likelihood that these customers actually fit our ideal persona and are actually going to be people who buy from us on a regular basis and refer and have a great experience is so small. Instead, we should be shifting the emphasis even harder across the brand. And then when times get a bit better and suddenly 10% of the people in the market are looking to make a decision, the only brand they're going to be thinking of is ours. I think absolutely there should be money spent on performance. And look, if you can turn £1 into £2, fucking spend it all day long, right? I'm not saying like I think direct response is fantastic. We just need to make sure that long-term we are shielding the stuff that is actually going to create a competitive.
Another theme that you tackle quite a bit, and I think that many marketers can also relate to or have heard about, is the relationship between marketing and sales, because it's notoriously bad sometimes or toxic. I don't even know how to describe it. Like, I think it would be the most natural thing for marketers to work closely with sales and then feed all of the learnings from sales into content, the ads, FAQs, website content, everything in between. But in practice, it's a common challenge that marketers don't get along with sales.
Yeah, you're right. Like there is generally like a tension between sales and marketing. I think we have to take more responsibility for that probably than sales. Generally speaking, like their frustrations at marketing are legitimate. And I think it's fair to say that their world is a bit simpler, right? So their focus is narrower. All they're concerned with is the next 90 days, bringing on new customers. They're very accountable. What they do is just inherently much more quantifiable. That means that they get taken more seriously at board level, even though I would argue that actually in most cases, sales is just a small part of marketing and marketing should really own the whole piece. But actually, because marketing seems so vague, whereas sales seems so clear, invariably sales get the voice at the board, at that kind of senior table in a way that we don't. Now, that's not an easy thing for a marketing manager or CMO to manage. But I do think there are some things that you can do. I think, first of all, so much of it comes back to clarity and being really honest, really realistic about what it is that we're trying to achieve and what we're measuring success in. So most marketing strategies, A, don't exist, or B, if they do exist, they're kind of like lots of different things conflated. But if you can instead say, well, actually, this is our bottom of funnel strategy. This is our short-term acquisition strategy measured in pounds and pence, right? And it's super clear, every bit as clear as anything that sales are doing, right? And that's that, right? And that is, I don't know, that's PPC or social ads or whatever the hell it is, right? But that is totally distinct from our top of funnel strategy, which is purely about brand awareness, brand engagement, increasing brand salience in the mind of our ideal buyer. This is long term. This is a totally different, distinct metric and has no place in a conversation about, what's happening in the next 3 to 6 months. They are two completely distinct things. And then maybe there's a kind of middle of funnel strategy as well around kind of engaging and nurturing people. But the point is, we need that absolute clarity so that when we go to sales or when we go to the board or whoever, we say, look, this is strategy number one, and this is how we measure it. Just one singular metric, right? Whether it's brand, whether it's whatever, but that is all it is, right? And this is the activity we require every single month to deliver that. And if we get pulled in other directions, then there will be a cost, and this is the cost. Whereas I think what generally happens in most marketing functions is these strategies don't exist, or there's one strategy that just kind of smushes them all together. And as a consequence, different channels get measured in the wrong way. So people will say, well, tell me what the ROI of our social media activity is. And actually, in most cases, ROI probably isn't the way you should be measuring your social media. And if you do, you're probably going to be disappointed and you'll probably pull resources from it. And it will probably become a self-fulfilling prophecy and it will fall in its arse and not achieve anything. And sales will be like, well, we told you it was a waste of time. But that's because we were measuring it the wrong way. We didn't take the goal, which was building the brand, seriously enough. So I think it's all about focus and clarity. And that is a much harder thing to get to within a marketing context than it is within a sales context. But if we can do that, then I think we get taken much more seriously by sales.
No, I see how splitting that up into like two strategies basically, or like long term, short term, and then communicating like that can really help us marketers communicate the more tangible aspects of marketing to sales, and then also communicate to them that our goal with the short term, for example, strategy right now, or these channels is to, generate sales qualified leads for you. But with this, let us do our thing. Let us build a brand so that we have future demand and clients.
I think you touched upon something important there as well, is I think within a B2B context, having that clarity around, again, what we mean by a sales qualified lead, right? Because obviously that will mean very different things in different organizations. And again, in too many organizations, all marketing knows is that they have to generate leads, and they get kind of sort of almost stuck in the middle where they're not really generating sales qualified leads. They're not really doing anything meaningful at a brand level. Mm-hmm. They're just generating leads, whatever the fuck that means. So I think having a really honest conversation with sales about what constitutes a lead or a sales qualified lead, that is, I think, one of the most important early stages in developing that healthy relationship.
Defining together what that means. Like, what does sales want from you actually? Like, what would help them also do their job will help marketers understand what they need to do more of and less of. And related to that, if you could wave a magic wand, what would be the one thing that you'd like to see marketing leaders, CMOs do more of?
Well, I've spoken a lot already about kind of the importance of focus and clarity. So I think what I'll say is something slightly different. I think most marketers just need to learn more about marketing. I kind of alluded to this in terms of how it's crazy that some moronic 23-year-old knowing nothing about anything could start you wouldn't start a law firm, right? Like you wouldn't start an account. We are total cowboys. And I think that we need to place much more emphasis on training and professional development and actually understanding the fundamentals. And I think the digital world has made the problem much worse, because then you add to that, talent pool, if you can call it talent pool, this ocean of nerds who know absolutely nothing about marketing, but think that digital is just this answer to everything. My advice, certainly to younger marketers, is worry a little bit less about the channels through which you communicate, right? Because, you've probably got a pretty instinctive grasp of what social media is doing and, what the Google algorithm's doing and blah, blah, blah. But instead learn about the fundamentals of marketing, the things that never change, whether that's, the behavioral psychology, brand strategy, content strategy. If you can put yourself in that 1% of marketers that are truly expert in what we do, right? And it is such a small percentage. Like all this stuff that seems so fuzzy and so complicated and always changing and blah, blah, blah will start to make sense. And that job of creating clarity and genuine strategies will suddenly feel achievable.
I think that's great advice. Basically, also be more marketing merry. I mean, educate yourself about marketing. And by the way, I think you're not giving yourself enough credit for, starting an agency, because you could have started an agency and just done, random acts of marketing for your clients as well. You changed it around, you became a marketing expert, and now you are here to spread the word.
I think I was very lucky there were certain people, from a digital point of view, it happened very early on with those two guys that I mentioned. And then in about 2014, I worked with this lady who had come from very, very big agency and also big brand. And she was incredible. In that sort of year, we had quite a tense relationship, but it's you don't know what you don't know. And then you work with someone like that and you're like, oh my God, I still don't know it. But now I know that there is this world of stuff out there. And it just put this fire under my arse. And for about 3 years after that, I literally, this is going to sound ridiculous, but I would get up at 5 a.m. every morning and I'd spend the first 3 hours just learning stuff, just learning. I did this for a few years and it transformed me as a marketer. And now I probably spend maybe an hour a day, right? So a kind of healthier amount of time, but not a day goes by where I'm not carving out that time to learn, to try and keep up to speed with the current literature, keep my finger on the pulse with what's going on, both digitally and in a more kind of traditional sense. You've got to carve out that time. And I would just say, actually, doing what you do, running a podcast, is a fantastic way of doing that. I've interviewed hundreds of people, and actually, I think it's one of the most intense ways of learning. It really can kind of accelerate your learning. So I don't know if you find that, but certainly that's what
I think hosting this podcast has been one of the most rewarding, things, the rewarding parts of my job right now. So definitely 100% can agree. Maybe you can share with us, where do you go in those like 1-2 hours that you carve out for learning? What are the first resources that come to mind?
There's a lot of really good podcasts, right? So like, let's say, for example, like Marketing Millennials is a good podcast.
Yeah.
They interview good people. But the problem is with most podcasts like that is they're dancing around lots of different topics, right? So you kind of like, just when you feel like you're getting somewhere with something, it then moves on to the next thing. So what I personally prefer to do is to pick like one person where I'm like, I'm going to fucking stalk this person for the next like 3 to 6 months, right? So it might be like, for behavioral psychology, that might be like Rory Sutherland. There was a period I interviewed Rory about 5 years ago, and I learned loads from that, read his book, but I then listened to literally every single podcast he'd ever done like 3 times and just made notes on them all. And after 6 months, I was like, right, like, I'm not saying I'm now an expert in this stuff. I'm definitely not, but I really feel like I kind of like I've sufficiently immersed myself in that as a subject. And then I might do it for like, you know, Mark Ritson stuff on brand, or it might be more of a kind of like Chris Walker within a B2B context. Like there was about a 6-month period where I just listened to his podcast every single day. So I think being really, really clear, again, it comes back to clarity and focus, right? So being really clear on like, I'm not just going to listen to an hour of a marketing podcast each day so I can kind of mentally tick it off and feel good about myself. Instead, I'm going to be really clear. What is that thing that I want to become expert in? Who is the best source of information for that? What are the 100 podcasts they've done, or what are the 5 books they've written, or whatever? And just lose yourself in that world for a period of months.
I'm curious now, like, what do you want to learn right now?
I've massively revisited brand. So I was like 7 or 8 years, probably more than that, 10 years ago, I spent a long time learning about David Arker's stuff, building strong brands, and the whole thing around kind of differentiation. And I sort of became like obsessed with that. And then I sort of lost touch with brand for a long time. And then over the last kind of year, 18 months, I think I've become aware that like, oh my God, I need to kind of get back to this, just how much has moved on. So learning a lot about, so principally kind of Mark Ritson, Byron Sharp, just the arguments for the other side of brand strategy, distinctiveness. So that's been probably my primary kind of focus, and all the kind of books surrounding that recently. And it'll move on. Like I'd say every 3 to 6 months, it will then become a new thing that I will then become obsessed with. And what helps me as well is I do the training for us internally. So I will like, as I read all this stuff, I'll then kind of build it into our training, and that reinforces it. And then I'll do some stupid Mary cartoon, and that will reinforce it. You've got to make sure you continue to think and talk about these things.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing, and thank you so much for your time. It was an absolute pleasure. And yeah, I cannot wait to see the next episode, the next chapter of Mary's marketing adventures. Yeah, so cool to have had the time to learn from you. And thank you so much for sharing and being so honest.
No, thank you. And if you ever have any ideas, I always say this to people, if you ever have any particular adventures in mind for Mary.
Oh, yeah.
Because I do run dry. So if you have any particular frustrations that you come up against, do let me know.
Thank you so much.